Yo, what is up guys, Grim here, and in today's video I'm going to give you guys my League Start build, but more importantly my League Start Atlas strategy, which I plan on making all of my currency with. That's right, I'm sharing it with you beforehand. You'll get the inside scoop, so if you want to follow along, you definitely can. But first of all, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, it would really help me out if you did, and like the video if you want to see more Grim content. Without further ado, let's get into it. So let's start out on the build side of things. So of course this is the bossing league, the tons of Uber content, and that's what everyone is focused on, and I'm no different. I do want to get into the Uber bossing content, and as such I had an armor aura stacker that I wanted to play. However, that's not a build you can really League Start. You need a ton of currency for that, and I think that Uber bossing is going to be most fun when you have a really powerful character for it. So as such, I'm actually going to start out with Corrupting Fever again, but I've put a lot of effort into refining it, making it much more smooth and much more beginner friendly, and there'll be a full comprehensive guide coming out after this in a few days time, before League Start. But it's fair to say I'm going to be starting Corrupting Fever, and there's a very specific reason for that. I believe with everyone focusing over on the bossing side of things, there's going to be a lot of demand for the actual stuff that comes from mapping. Not only stuff like Eldritch crafting currencies, scarabs, and also, more importantly, all of the Guardian maps that fuel the entire bossing loop. There's not going to be any people doing invitations if there's no Guardian maps for them to run. There's also not going to be any Maven keys or Shaper sets or Uber Elder sets, or even any of the Eldritch keys if there's no one doing maps. So I thought that that would be a very good place to start and a very good place to focus my efforts to build up a nice currency bank to then later on get into the Uber bossing myself with an absolute powerhouse of a character. So let's talk a little bit more about Corrupting Fever though, as it's a build that I didn't recommend lastly due to all of the massive changes and a lot of things being up in the air. Well, after playing it at 3.17, I can confidently say for an experienced player who is familiar with the mapping playstyle, it's absolutely one of the best and most smooth League Starters you can play without a shadow of a doubt. And it's an absolute powerhouse for generating early currency, and I don't think that there's too many other builds that really come close to competing with it when it comes to early map clear in terms of the amount of bang for your buck you get. If I had to describe it in a sentence, it's essentially like getting all of the perks of an endgame tornado shot omni-shot character at the fraction of the cost. It's true that you don't get all of the flat damage and defensives of an omni-shot character, but you get it at like 1/20th of the cost. It's absolutely crazy. And in addition to that, it uses very few uniques, and all of the items are self-craftable with essences. Now the cool thing about the new league is that we have stuff like Harvest and Essence available on the map device, and that means that all of the crafting materials required to make the build really scale very hard are fully available from day one and easily accessible even on solo self-found. The only issues that you would have running into as a Corrupting Fever character in the new patch, which I'm currently trying to figure out myself, is going to be acquiring cluster jewels, because they are going to be shared between the Corrupting Fever players as well as all of the Fizz Trapper boss character players, which could be a little expensive, as well as the potential higher cost of an Ashes of the Stars. Fortunately, the build doesn't require Ashes of the Stars, so overall, if you're looking for a League Starter which is very strong at mapping and you have some experience in kind of getting through the Atlas on a lower damage single target character, so one that's not designed for bossing, Corrupting Fever is probably one of the things that you should be looking into. Alright, so now with the build stuff out of the way, we all know what Grimro is playing and there'll be a guide for it very soon. Let's get into the Atlas strategy, as it's quite a doozy. So, as for my Atlas strategy, I'm of course going to be focusing on the Sentinel League. It goes without saying that here on Grimro's channel, we always focus on the new league and try and push it to the limit, and Sentinel is going to be no exception. So I'm going to run through my plans about Sentinel and how I plan on min-maxing it, and then we're going to move on to the absolutely crazy thing that I've come up for, which is going to pair with Sentinel. So Sentinel, after actually consuming more and more content about it and kind of understanding it more and talking about it with other people, it is probably, I imagine, going to boil down to the following. So you get 3 Sentinels, each with a set duration and a number of empowerments. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, go watch my Sentinel video. But it's fair to say the name of the game is essentially trying to churn through those empowerments as fast and as low effort as possible. So, you're essentially looking for mechanics where you can piano all the Sentinels, they'll all come out, empower all their stuff, you blast it, you get all your rewards, and you're on your merry way. You've finished with Sentinel for the map. And that is basically going to be the name of the game. So you're looking for mechanics that can essentially allow you to have no downtime while doing that. So the first mechanic which I want to suggest, which pairs the best with Sentinel, is Blight, taking the immune response notable on the Atlas passive tree. So by standard, Blight gives you anywhere between 400 to 500 monsters of magic, rare, and normal quality, and sometimes unique as well, that come out of the Blight, and there's not really any sort of hurry in order to slay these. So you could, in theory, piano all your Sentinels, let them go and do all their empowerment stuff, and then attack the Blight monsters. You don't have to immediately kill the Blight monsters, as there's not really any penalty for letting it. You have to sit there and wait for the Blight anyway, so it's fine. So I imagine Blight is going to be one of the best dumps for Sentinel charges and empowerment. And with the notable, you can take it all the way up to about 800 to 1,000 monsters that come out of a Blight. More than enough to empower any number of Sentinels that you may have at your disposal. So you can probably use the blue and the red one at the very least, and then maybe even the yellow one as well. And you can use them all on that Blight in your map, and that'll only take about 1 to a minute and a half of your time, and you get through Blight as well as Sentinel all in one fell swoop. Now, if you don't want to do Blight because it's going to slow you down quite a bit, I completely understand. And I think that there are a few other mechanics which you can do a similar Sentinel dumping strategy on. So the first one I want to mention here is Strongbox. So Strongbox is most likely best suited to the blue Sentinel, as you can just smack it as soon as you you smack the blue Sentinel, you pop the Strongbox, bzz, it shotguns the entire box, and then you kill everything. I imagine that will be a fairly suitable strategy. And then another one you could also go with is Harbinger, specifically for the red Sentinel and the yellow Sentinel. So it goes without saying that Harbingers have a ton of rare monsters in them, and that's exactly what you're looking for when using the yellow Sentinel. And in addition to that, the red Sentinel can also probably power up most of the Harbinger mobs, and you can get through all of that stuff as well. So overall, that's kind of going to be the name of the game. I'm going to lean a little bit more into the Strongbox and Harbinger side of things, because Blight is definitely going to limit your mapping speed. However, if you're having some issues with a Sentinel and you're getting frustrated with it, Blight would be probably a pretty good place to start and look into. However, I think the real efficiency will come from stuff like Harbinger and Strongbox. Alright, so moving on. Sentinel's obviously going to be a massive draw card. The rewards look pretty damn promising and enticing, and it's fair to say for solo players, I think it's pretty much a no-brainer that you're going to want to be using Sentinels in every single map and prioritizing it, as it's free and the rewards seem to scale very, very well. Now, how are we going to basically funnel that Sentinel juice and make use of it and power it and kind of link into all of the stuff I said earlier about mapping bosses and all sorts of stuff like that? Well, enter my strategy setup. So of course we got the Sentinel stuff, but what am I doing to generate my early currency? So I mentioned stuff like Kloss jewels being very expensive for Corrupting Fever early on. Well, my initial plan is of course to rush the Atlas as fast as possible, but while I'm doing it, I'm going to be using Kirak Essence on every single map. And I'm also going to be taking all of the Essence nodes as well on the Atlas passive tree. More on that tree in a second here. But I'm going to use those Essences on gear and craft for myself first and foremost, but also I'm going to craft what I believe is also going to sell the best in the meta. So with everyone getting 4 or 5 Essences a map, there's not going to be super high demand to be able to buy them on the market, is there? So you're going to have to probably want to use them yourself and craft items. So from my understanding, Sentinel doesn't drop any itemized rares. So you're not going to be able to get any free insane rare gear like you used to from, for example, Expedition or Ultimatum. You're going to have to either craft it yourself or find it and identify it. Meaning there's a pretty big gap in the market here for people who are willing to craft. And crafting materials will be abundant and solo self-foundable. So overall, I think that there's going to be a lot of money to be made early from crafting with with essence. You know, whether you do belts, rings, you know, boots, shields, helmets, anything, you can probably do it all and it will be profitable. But the idea is going to be about coming up with a system and also honing in on what the things that are most in demand are going to be. So overall, I imagine it's probably going to be early life and resist gear, suppression, and things that kind of have ailment avoidance on them. Those are generally the things which go very, very quickly and are very, very in demand. And overall, that's what I'll be focusing on. In addition to that, obviously with my Sentinel shenanigans, I'm going to pick up Harbinger and Strongbox to funnel the strategy which I just talked about earlier. So that's my early game plan. Overall, if I fall short on some of the cluster jewels, I might pick up a few chaos recipes here and there, but it's unlikely I think I will need that, but we'll just have to see how good Sentinel ends up being. Alright, so in the mid game, which is essentially for me, after you get the first two Eldritch bosses down and they're out of the way, I am planning to go full on commitment to Eldritch Altars. So overall, this is definitely going to be a risky strategy. It is, however, how I acquired my Headhunter so quickly in 3.17, and it's fair to say they have made them a whole lot harder, but the potential for rewards are also a whole lot higher. And with an already established economy and understanding about how Eldritch currencies work, I imagine the demand for them is going to be there right from day one. I remember back in the day, in 3.17 League Start, I was selling the lesser Eldritch currencies for 2C each. So I would be surprised if they sell that much, but I think overall there will be quite a strong demand from them, and I need them myself anyway for my own gear, so I think Eldritch Altars are the play. Coupled with Sentinel and the two mechanics that I mentioned earlier, I think overall it's going to be a strong combo. Now, where it really gets insane though is when we get to the end game, that being with all four of your Watchstones. With all four of the Void Stones, the Atlas seriously opens up with the new additions of all the Keystones and Notables, and this strategy takes full advantage of the vast majority of them, boasting I think 4 of the new Keystones and 8 of the new Notables. So what is this strategy and how is it going to work, and how is it going to make me and you potentially rich? Well, of course, we know Eldritch Altars are incredibly powerful, and I think I've found a way to take all of the Keystones on the Atlas that power them up with none of the downsides. I know, quite crazy. But anyway, let's get into it. Okay, so baseline, we're going to have all 4 Void Stones and full completion. That is the goal, and in order to get there, as a Corrupting Fever character, on day 2 or 3, you may need to employ some boss killing services, as your gear may just not be at the point yet in which you can slay those bosses as it needs to be. However, with that aside, I plan on doing all of the Eldritch bosses myself, and you know, when we get to Uber and Maven, we'll see how the character's doing, but it's definitely possible to do it. It's just whether or not it's efficient. So moving on from that though, after I have my 4 Void Stones, what is the plan? Well, the plan is going to be to favorite City Square as our favorite map. So you might find City Square a familiar map, and that is because there is all sorts of shenanigans that can only be done effectively on City Square with Eldritch Altars. Anyway, let's cover City Square first. So in the past, City Square has been a highly effective map for a number of strategies, but its big weakness has always been the fact that it's incredibly difficult to sustain because it has such a low natural mob count. Well, enter the first keystone we're picking up here, and that is Singular Focus. So Singular Focus is the kind of keystone I expect most end game, you know, kind of pushing players to be having on their Atlas. I don't think that anyone is going to not take this unless there's some weird interactions with other mechanics. So overall, if you have all of the 12 favorite slots, which you won't at the start, I understand that, but if you did, and you take Singular Focus, you have a 78.4% chance to drop your favorite map, which is a significant increase from before. I think that it capped out around 58 or 60, somewhere in that ballpark, with the Notable, which was, I believe, Shaping of the Seas. Now, Shaping of the Seas is gone, but we of course do have Singular Focus now, so 78.4% chance to to get your favorite map is massive, meaning over 3/4 of the maps that drop will be your favorite, meaning now maps are essentially meaningless. Everyone will be able to infinitely sustain their favorite map with singular focus, meaning that there is no cost of mapping. So people running, for example, City Square, Cemetery, they will have so many maps that they won't know what to do with it. Now, the exception to this rule will be players running, most likely, Harvest. So Harvest is, of course, on the map device. There will be people running Harvest, and the map of choice for Harvest runners is Atoll. And they basically kill none of the monsters, they don't kill the boss, they don't kill anything. They just run to the Harvest, they get in, they get out, and they make bank. But they need a massive influx of Atoll maps to be able to fund that playstyle. Well, as a player with singular focus, you can over-sustain your map of choice just fine, no problem, and then swap tactically to Atoll, pump a bunch of Atolls, sell them all to the Harvest runners, and then swap back to your map as needed. So that's going to be our first income stream. Running City Square, swapping to Atoll as needed to sell to the Harvest spammers, and then swap back to our preferred map. Now, if there's no demand for Atoll at the very start, you can also do Core. So Core, in a similar vein as Atoll, is going to be for the Blight players. So with the low cost of maps and the very, very disposable nature of them, I imagine Blight players are no longer going to full clear their cores or even worry with the boss. They'll just run into the core map, do the Blight, do all their shenanigans, and then just port out straight away. And that probably will be the highest profit per hour for that strategy, doing Blight. And again, those people probably won't over sustain their maps, so they will need to buy the map of choice, which will be Core. So with singular focus, you can make a ton of bank, you can infinitely sustain, and it's just parties all around. So that's the first keystone on offer here. And that's just the very start. So that allows us to go infinite on City Square. We can now run this incredibly powerful map without any downsides. But the question is, why City Square? Well, let's dive in. So the key of this strategy is Eldritch Altars. With the new buffs to Eldritch Altars, we've seen an introduction of a divination card reward, which is actually a buff, it's not a nerf. We did see the removal of Scarab's duplicated, but that's not an issue because that one wasn't that good anyway. Overall, I think it's a net buff to the rewards of the altars, because you can now basically pop anywhere between 5 to 10 stacked decks per instance that you click on the divination card one, which is pretty crazy. But it's not just that, we also have 2 new keystones that have been added here for the Eldritch Altars. So if you're trying to farm specifically Eldritch Altars, the map to do it on is City Square. And the reason for that is that if you go on City Square, you can run straight to the boss, slay it, and that blocks out all boss modifiers from all subsequent altars, meaning you can take percentage Scarab, percentage Divination card, and percentage Eldritch Ickes as a, pretty much guarantee. There's going to be one of those on there pretty much, or if you get unlucky, you might get some of the other like Eldritch influence ones, but most of the time you're going to get a few of those at least every map, which is pretty damn good. Now, overall, they might have added other stuff, we don't know about that, but it's fair to say City Square is your best bet if you're trying to focus on Eldritch Altar farming specifically. It also is one of the fastest maps in the game, meaning you can get through as many Eldritch Altars as possible per hour. You can do about 40 to 50 maps depending on how juiced up your character is, maybe 20 to 30 on the low end per hour of City Square. It's just that fast, and that is going to be the name of the game, doing these maps as fast as possible, which is pretty enticing. Let's talk a little bit about how Eldritch Altars really do shine though. Okay, so with the new expansion, or the new patch, we have 2 keystones that come into effect for Eldritch Altars. So the first up here, Wrath of the Cosmos. So every altar you take, you're going to get a 25% chance to duplicate Eldritch currency. You're going to get a 25% increased damage taken debuff, and 25% chance for lesser and greater Eldritch currency to be dropped as grand. So that is a massive buff. So when you get 4 altars, those bonuses are guaranteed, which is absolutely crazy. It means that there's going to be a massive influx and potential to generate tons of tier 3 Eldritch Ickes and Embers, which is a really big deal, as those are massively in demand for pretty much every build and crafting project early on. Okay, so we've established that it's insane. All right, so there's obviously a massive downside there, but we'll get to that in a second. But it's fair to say that the income from Eldritch Altars, ignoring the downside, is massively increased just from this one keystone alone, assuming you can run it effectively. All right, moving on. We have Eldritch Gaze as the other keystone here. So Eldritch Altars have an additional downside, and they have 50% increased Eldritch Altar upsides, which means it's 1.5 times the loot. That is ridiculous. So right now, I believe that the Scarab percentage caps out at around 3%. It'll now be 4.5%. So it's just 50% more rewards straight up. Absolutely absurd. Now, of course, Eldritch Altars have an additional downside. That's actually a pretty big deal. And in general, the patch, while it has introduced stuff like the new divination card chance, has introduced far more brutal and punishing downsides. However, this is not a problem, as you can pretty much entirely cheese these downsides, with the exception of any massive defensive buffs. So for example, something like 80% elemental resistance and max res, and for physical builds like 52% reduced physical damage taken. There is pretty much a way to completely mitigate these downsides, and let me explain. So as I mentioned, when you're on City Square, you can completely block out the boss part of the modifier pool, so you don't have to worry about that at all. And in fact, the boss is dead as its first modifiers before you pop any of the Eldritch Altars. So the boss is basically like doing a vanilla boss. You don't have to worry about the increased damage taken from Wrath of the Cosmos or anything like that. So the boss is absolutely a joke. You don't have to worry about that at all. Just meaning the only thing that's left is the lead mechanics in the map, as well as the actual existing influence modifiers and monsters. So it's not too dangerous at all. However, obviously you do still have to be on your toes, as these modifiers can get pretty intense, especially ones that make your projectiles go in all different directions and all sorts of stuff like that. But as I mentioned, we've blocked out all of the boss mods. So now you only have two options. You have either a global modifier or a Eldritch Minion modifier. So the Eldritch Minion modifiers are by far the best. They're the ones that give you a flat chance to give you rewards, which is like Scarabs, Divination cards, and Eldritch currency. So overall, those are the best. The global ones have some nice ones like chance to duplicate currency, but some of the best ones like duplicate scarabs were removed. So those aren't really that good, and they're also the most punishing, reducing stuff like spell suppression, giving you that projectile debuff, and doing all sorts of other nasty things. However, the minion ones generally only apply buffs to minions, and Eldritch minions can only be normal and magic. There are no rare Eldritch minions. So overall, you're essentially turbo buffing normal and magic mobs, which are essentially cannon fodder. As long as you don't make them immune to damage, you should just be able to one-shot them in most cases, meaning the actual downsides of these keystones are almost non-existent, as long as you don't make them immune. You're essentially getting way more loot for increased damage taken, which is certainly scary, but you've already dealt with the boss, so that's not too big a deal. The only thing that's going to really threaten you is like essences or something along those lines, and additional downsides, which, you know, okay, as long as you're not making them immune, you just get free loot. So you're essentially cheesing both of the keystones, meaning you can do this on day 2 or 3 without much trouble. If you're something like an Inquisitor, which ignores elemental resistances, you're absolutely laughing at this, as you're just going to one-shot those minions anyway. Physical builds are also in a pretty good place, as, you know, unless you take double 52% reduced physical damage taken, you're pretty much like laughing all the way to the bank. So overall, you can see that now Eldritch Altars are in an incredibly powerful position. We get these 2 keystones which absolutely gigabuff them to the moon, and we've pretty much got no downsides, and you're running one of the fastest maps. So it becomes a race. How many maps can you do per hour, and how fast can you churn through the Eldritch Altars? And in order to do that, we want to hyper focus on lead mechanics which are fast, efficient, and give you a lot of currency, and also synergize with Sentinel, but also don't slow down your altars. Enter the second part of our strategy. Okay, so overall, we have a slew of additional options here. So we've already taken 3 keystones, and we don't want to spend any time buying scarabs, sextants, or anything along those lines. We don't want to worry about that. So obviously, Stream of Conscious is going to be a pretty good pickup. So now we're just getting the maps infinitely sustained and handed to us, alking, chisel, and vialing them, putting them straight back into the machine and going around and around and around and getting free bonuses from it from Stream of Consciousness. Now, what's really cool though is that we also have the ability to block out a bunch of mechanics. So as I mentioned, we're taking all these Eldritch Altars and it can get a bit spooky. You don't want to do stuff like Legion or Metamorph because you will just die because you're taking 150% additional damage or something like that from taking Wrath of the Cosmos. So we want to block all those out. Largely, we're blocking out Breach, we're blocking out Abyss, we're blocking out Expedition, we're blocking out Harvest, pretty much everything that isn't Delirium or Heist. And the reason for that is because Delirium, while it can be quite challenging, is pretty benign, and overall you can get a ton of free Delirium orbs for not much effort just by clearing some extra monsters. So overall, we're taking pretty much blocking everything out except for Delirium and Heist. Now this creates a pretty interesting combination. So between all of these nodes, Stream of Consciousness, the base rates, and all of that kind of combined, we end up with some pretty crazy results. Okay, so we have our base rate of 8% chance to get a Delirium Mirror and a Heist Locker. Okay, we all understand that. We also have a roughly 40% chance to get an Essence, a Domination Shrine, and a Strongbox. And then we get 16% increase to the base chance from all of our notables here, which brings us up to a pretty considerable margin. And then we're also taking a bunch of nodes on the tree here, which are going to juice us up even more, which is going to be like stuff like the 4% Delirium over here, the Essence nodes, the Domination nodes, all sorts of stuff like that. And then we get further increase to the base chance from Stream of Consciousness. So overall, the result of this from running our strategy is we get a 32% chance at base for a Mirror of Delirium in our map. So 1 in 3 maps is going to have a free Delirium Mirror, which is going to give us a ton of potential Cluster Jewels as well as Delirium Orbs if we can handle it. And then we're also getting a 36% chance at a Heist Locker, which is going to give you a ton of contracts and blueprints. And then we have 2 essences guaranteed per map, which is crazy. And then you have another 4 on top of that with Zana Essence. You're getting 6 essences per map. You are going to be the crafting tycoon of the server. And then of course we have close to 2 shrines guaranteed per map. It comes out to about 196% chance, so pretty much 2 per map. And then you have 176% chance at Strongbox, which is, pretty much like 1 and a bit per map, which is pretty damn good. So how does this all factor into Sentinel though? So we've got our Strongboxes and our shrines for Sentinel. We also have Harbinger for Sentinel, but failing that, we're also got our 3 unique bosses, which are unmodified in the middle of the map, which we can pop our yellow Sentinel on if we want to go down that route. And we can also use the Eldritch Shrines as a sort of mini Strongbox. So you can pop your Sentinels and then pop a shrine, or sorry, an altar, and it'll blow up all the mobs and you can slay them all as long as they're not too juiced up from the keystones. So overall, it does create a very, very synergistic package. And the interesting thing with Sentinel is that you want to get through as many sets of Sentinels per hour as possible. So the more you get through, the more reward tiles you're going to get, and the more opportunities to combine Sentinels that you're going to get as well. So overall, it's incredibly synergistic. And due to the fact we're running a speed-based mapping strategy, we can also play heavily into the boss meta kind of supply chain here. So of course, we're going to be running Eater of Worlds, but you could quite easily swap over to Exarch without any issues here. Would cost you a few extra points, but overall you can kind of go down either one of the sides and supply an absolutely massive amount of writhing and screaming invitations. And these will be more expensive in the new league with the potential nerf to Ashes of the Stars and Omniscience drop rates, the new loot from the Eldritch currencies and all of that stuff like that coming from them. It overall could be a massive moneymaker just from that alone. So overall you're going to be getting that, but then we're also going to be able to spec into Cirrus maps over here and get more Conqueror maps, as well as the potential, if you wanted to come up here and get Remnants of the Past if you wanted to drop some other points for that. Absolutely all on the table and things that you can do to amp up your currency making. Now I'm personally taking the Sextant nodes here as well. because Sextant rolling early, in fact, actually obviously adds additional monsters, which is going to be additional loot and additional maps that you can sell to people farming Atoll and Core, but it also allows you to sell undesirable Sextant modifiers to people who do want them and make money just through rolling Sextants, as well as giving you the extra juice. So it's pretty damn good, and I'm taking the Sextant mods as well. So overall, you can see the extreme synergistic nature of all of these different mechanics, and it can be tweaked, it can be tuned, and you can kind of go in a ton of different directions. To kind of give you guys an idea of what you'll be selling and what you'll need to do this strategy, you'll of course need a character that can do it, but overall you probably ideally want to have 4 Void Stones, 12 favorite slots. You don't need 12, but you probably want 12, as well as you know, the Atlas mostly unlocked. You could drop a lot of points here and there, but I would want to get as many points as possible to really get going. But then all you'll need after that is an initial city square map pool. You'll need Alks, Chisels, Vals, Sextants optionally, and Chaos for Zana Essence, and then you're just going to be rolling. That's all you need in terms of supplies to continually infinitely sustain. And then in terms of what you'll be selling heist contracts, blueprints, and markers. You'll be selling maps, you'll be selling T16s of specific layouts like the Core and the Atoll, and maybe even some of your own city squares. And you'll also be selling Guardian maps with Cirrus and stuff like that, as well as the invitations for the Eldritch bosses. And then you'll also be selling bulk Scarabs, because you're getting 50% increased chance at the Scarabs, which is really crazy. And then of course your main money maker is going to be from the bulk Ichors and Embers, which you're going to be selling fire sale prices. You're just going to get them out of there and make as much money as possible. In addition to that, you'll also have essences, which you'll have a ton of, as well as essence crafts, which you should also be looking into doing a little bit of on the side as well. And then finally, believe it or not, the altars actually give you a ton of unique items when you pop the X% chance at unique items. And early on, you can sell stuff like Diadian Dawns, Cold Iron Points, and all sorts of stuff like that for a considerable amount of currency. And then to top it all off, if you decided to go down the Delirium route, which you certainly can avoid if you don't want to, you'll also have Delirium Orbs and Cluster Jewels to sell as well. Whew, that was quite a marathon. So hopefully you guys see the potential here. This is just one of my different ideas that I've got going on. And you'll also have Sentinel going at the same time. Definitely a lot to take in, but I think it's definitely going to be one of the better strategies that you can go for early on to really get a leg up on the economy and start fueling your build, and maybe even get all of the way or part of the way there to a Headhunter or a Mage Blood or whatever you're aiming for in the end game. And that's going to be my strategy as well as my League Start build. Hopefully you guys check out the big comprehensive guide I'm going to put out in Corrupting Fever. It's by far one of the best builds for this strategy, I think, as long as you take it, you know, pretty easy and get the gear that you need before you start. I think it'll be a complete blast. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. I'll see you guys in the next one. Cheers.